You guys voted. We listened. This week, it's the greatest college quarterback of all time. Will Tim Tebow be torpedoed, or will Roger Staubach be Gator bait? This is Convince Me. All right, everybody, welcome in. It's another week. It's another episode of the Convince Me Show. I'm Andy Rutherford, joined, as always, by Mr. Brian Bennett, Mr. Casey Elrod. Gentlemen, how goes it?
I'm so excited to be the mediator tonight for this show, right? For 4 long years, Tim Tebow ruined my birthday, and now this is the revenge of the rod happens tonight. Justice will be coming very swiftly tonight for somebody.
That sounded like a title and then this caption of a really bad porn movie. Revenge of the Rod. Justice is coming. All right, Bennett, how are you?
Man, I'm not as excited as Elrod, but I think tonight's subject is perfect time to do this. You know, it's getting cooler outside. We've got sports on TV, all sports on TV, so should be a good episode. Should be one of my favorites.
And since both of our contestants tonight have clients that won the Heisman Trophy, I thought it was only appropriate that I wore the jersey of the one person that has got screwed out of the Heisman Trophy, the greatest in the history of that trophy. And that is
Tebow did get screwed out of the Heisman Trophy his junior year, and we will get into that in just a little bit later on. You should be wearing a Charles Woodson jersey.
No.
But anyway, before we get into the meat of the matter, guys, follow our socials. We're on Facebook. That's probably our most active page, facebook.com/convincemeshow. Every Tuesday night before the show drops, we'll put up a preview. As a matter of fact, you might be watching the preview right now on Facebook. But if you're not, next Tuesday, go check out the preview over there. We are on Twitter at Convince Me Show. And if you were following us on Twitter, you had a chance to vote on this week's show. Our Twitter followers are the ones that picked this topic. If you don't like this topic and you think we should pick better topics, then go follow our Twitter. So next time we put up a vote, your voice can be heard as well. And, of course, we're also on Instagram. Convince Me Show is the handle there. And, of course, the show drops every single week, Wednesday mornings on YouTube, tinyurl.com/convincemeshow, and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And, gentlemen, I got to be honest. Of the 4 choices the people had, if I was allowed to vote, I mean, I guess technically I could have voted, but I didn't. I left it completely up to the viewers. This probably wouldn't have been my vote, but I am looking forward to it. Bennett, are you looking forward to this showdown?
I'm looking forward to it. I'm ready to talk some football.
It's about dang time. Of course, football coming back. The SEC kicks off this weekend. Of course, we've had some ACC and some other things going on for the last couple of weekends. It's that time of year again. Seems a little weird to not have people in the crowds as much. There's a few trickling back in, but it's good to be talking about it again. So, Elrod, without any further ado, do you have anything to say before we kick it off?
I promise, this is my promise to you, Rod. I promise to be as impartial as the next Supreme Court justice will be. That's my promise to you.
We are not getting into that on this show.
Well, here is the tiebreaker, or here is the challenge tonight. It is Heisman Trophy related on who goes first tonight. As you know, or as you will learn tonight, both of these quarterbacks won the Heisman Trophy. So to decide who goes first tonight, the category is total offense. I want to know one thing. Closest without going over. I want to know who holds the record for total offense, or I want to know how much offense was one Heisman Trophy winner responsible for. in terms of total yardage. Of the Heisman Trophy winners, who has the highest total offense?
Highest career or highest for the year they won?
Highest career. Actually, no, I'm sorry, 1 year. This is 1 year totals. Highest single total offensive 1 year. And I'll give you a hint. I'll give you both a hint. Tim Tebow is 12th on this list. Roger Staubach is 32nd on this list. And for a bonus point, an Elrod point.
Okay, go ahead.
You can tell me who holds this record, you get an Elrod point.
I have no idea. I'm going to take a wild guess.
Most total yards.
Most total yards.
Does returns count? Or is it
Yes.
just offensive yards?
Offensive
Innocent.
yards.
So
But
returns
you
don't
don't kick
count.
return yard.
Okay.
No. This is a tricky one.
Well,
All right, I'll give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pencils down, boys. What do you have? What do you have? What do you have? We've got 6,227, and we got 4,578. Bennett is the closest without going over. Who holds the record for most yardage in terms of total offense? Ty Detmer with air raid offense at BYU. 5,022 yards. Second on that list is Kyler Murray, almost eclipsed him, but he came about 50 yards short. Tim Tebow, 3,970, and Roger Staubach, 2,073. So over twice as many yards for Ty Detmer in 1990, the air raid BYU offense. All right.
Never trust anybody named Ty.
Nobody got any
Trust a
Elrod.
Mormon. Oh, sorry. I guess that was terrible.
Nobody got any Elrod points, but Bennett was closest without going over. So, Bennett, do you want to go first or second tonight with opening statements?
I'll go second.
Second. All right. Sir Rutt, tell me why Tim Tebow is a better college quarterback than Roger Staubach.
I'm going to take my opening argument a completely different way than what I would normally do. Elrod, I want to have a little chat with you. Elrod, tell everybody when your birthday is.
September 18th.
September 18th, which typically, if the third Saturday in September, if your birthday is on a Saturday, that's going to be the third Saturday in September, correct?
It is.
All right. From 2007 to 2010, you're a big Tennessee football fan, correct?
Me? No, there's no way. No. Yes.
Judging by what you're wearing. For those 4 years, there was a man that would either come to town or to Knoxville or Tennessee would go to Gainesville. Somebody ruined your birthday 4 years in a row. Am I correct in saying that?
Chris Leak really ruined it the first year, not Tim Tebow in 2006.
Tebow
got the years
Tebow
right.
was part of that game.
He
It was early
but
on.
Leak, Dallas Baker won that game.
Dallas Baker touchdown maker. But anyway, it's safe to say, Elrod, I know that I could come in here tonight and have the perfect argument. Matter of fact, I plan to do just that. But unless Bennett completely fumbles the ball, which I don't expect him to do, I'm not expecting to win tonight. So in a strange way, I'm going off the format of this show, and I'm not trying to convince you because I don't think there's anything I can say to convince you. But I'm still going to make my argument, but I'm going to make it to you, the listener. Because Elrod is not going to give me this argument by any means, but I want you all, based on your own merit, based on the arguments without any bias to really pay attention tonight. Because if I can somehow convince Elrod, if hell freezes over tonight and that happens, that would be fantastic. But I'm not trying to get approval I'm not going to get. But to you, the listener, or viewer, if you're watching on YouTube, what I want to show you is this. All right, I'm not even talking to you anymore for right now. I'll get back to you when we get into arguments. But for you, the listener,
you just come on right back.
When somebody says who is the greatest college football player of all time, there's going to be a lot of answers. There's going to be Herschel Walker. There's going to be Jim Brown. There's going to be Archie Griffin. There's going to be a lot of answers. And if you had somebody to make a list, if you went online and looked for a list, you're going to find all of those names at the top. But in almost every list that you go through, there are some exceptions, but in almost everyone you go through, at the top of the highest person on that list, that's designation is QB instead of RB, is going to be Mr. Tim Tebow. Now, I did find a few that had Mr. Tim Tebow as number one. But in general, I wouldn't even make the argument he's the greatest college football player ever, although that can be made, but that's not what we're arguing tonight. We're talking quarterback. Tim Tebow will be on most of those lists your first quarterback named. Now, there are other great quarterbacks that have played college football. There's your Matt Leinerts of the world. There's your Cam Newtons. There's your Roger Staubach. But Tim Tebow is and was, at the collegiate level not too long ago, a man of faith, a man of character, a leader of men both on and off the field. And what I will show you, loyal listener, possibly Elrod, but I'm not betting, hold my breath on that. But what I will show you tonight is that Tim Tebow is and was the ultimate competitor, the ultimate winner, the epitome of toughness, and the greatest college quarterback to ever play football.
This 7-minute promo brought to you by the University of Florida. Okay.
Where's my check?
All right, Bennett, tell me why it's Roger Staubach and not Tim Tebow.
Well, when I was thinking about this, I was reflecting back on the history of the NCAA, and there have been many great quarterbacks from each decade, really, that have left their mark on the collegiate level in some way or another. As we know, the quarterback position is the most important position on the field. They're the commander. They're the leader. We know that the quarterback position has also evolved tremendously over the years. Starting out back in the olden times, quarterback was really just like another option to run the ball. And then you fast forward to today's time, we've got QBs that are either mobile quarterbacks. We've got quarterbacks that are your quarterback / running back, like hybrid. We've even got those prolific pocket passers that run these offenses that pass 40, 50, 60 times a game. And then we've got quarterbacks that kind of fall in that category somewhere mixed in between all that. But when you think of all the quarterbacks that have played at the college level, there are a few that have stood the test of time as more memorable quarterbacks than their peers. And they leave like a lasting impression on fans, on the school, on the record books. And just to give a quick example, I can name off 3 great quarterbacks from all 3 of our favorite schools. For Florida State, you got Charlie Ward, you got Chris Winkie, and Jameis Winston. For Florida, there's Steve Spurrier, Danny Warfel, and, of course, Tim Tebow. And for UT, there's Heath Schuler, T. Martin, and Eric Ainge. No, I'm just kidding. Peyton Manning, of course, Peyton Manning. Now, you could make an argument that each of these quarterbacks is better at this or better at that. maybe, let's take, for example, Florida State. Maybe Jameis was better at scoring. Maybe Winky had the better stats, and maybe Charlie Ward had the overall better ability. But there's one thing that really sticks out to me more than any other quarterback. There's one that undoubtedly is the greatest quarterback from his school by far. He's the greatest player from his school. He actually is the greatest player from the armed forces. And I'm going to say the greatest quarterback to ever play in the independent division. He completely changed the game of football at his school, and he's really a true pioneer of the sport, as he was one of the first true dual threat quarterbacks, and a dang good one too. Of course, I'm talking about Roger Staubach, aka Roger the Dodger, aka Captain Comeback, aka Captain America. I'd argue that there's nobody that's ever meant any more to their school than Roger Staubach has. He's the measuring stick of leadership, like Tebow. He's measuring stick of resiliency, toughness, and like the gentleman that Rhett talked about, Mr. Tebow, he is the epitome of greatness, both on and off the field. So, Elrod, tonight I'm going to present you with some very solid evidence that would point to Roger Staubach as the greatest all-around NCAA quarterback of all time.
All right.
All right. Well, gentlemen, this is going to be a good one. If you're watching this on Facebook, this is where it ends for you. You want to know who wins this? You've got to come tomorrow to YouTube or to the podcast to find out. If you're on YouTube with the podcast right now, you just got to sit through this commercial, and then we'll get right back to you. But if you're on Facebook, be sure to check us out tomorrow on the podcast, on YouTube, wherever you are. Be sure to check us out next week. We've got a different kind of episode coming up for you next week. It's a little different than anything we've done thus far. But it will be a lot of fun. We hope to see you then. Facebook people, peace. Podcast and YouTube people, we'll be right back right after this. And we are back. Elrod, where are we going next?
We're going to go back to the beginning for each of these men. And we're going to start off with you, Rut, with Mr. Tebow. Now, my first remembrance of Tim Tebow was not him breaking my heart 2 days before my birthday in 2006 in Neyland Stadium. It was watching him I believe he was on an episode of Two-A-Days on MTV. I think Hoover was playing his high school in Florida for a game. That was the first time I saw Tim Tebow, was on one of those episodes. Rush Pro.
I don't think he was on Two-A-Days. He was on the ESPN special.
I'm pretty sure he was on in 2005. He was on the episode. I remember them.
What?
Fact checker on that. So take me back to the beginning. Tell me about his high school career, and talk to me about his recruitment as well.
Do we need to hire a fact checker?
We do. We need a fourth man on this show. We
need to hire a producer to edit all this crap, because I suck at that. But anyway, before we get into his high school, let's go all the way back to the beginning of Tim Tebow's life, just to kind of show us what kind of fighter he really is. In a nutshell, Tebow's parents both attended school at the University of Florida. They met there. They got married. They had some kids. They moved to the Philippines. They're Christian people. They were there doing some ministry, and it wasn't just, they went in for a mission trip for a week or two. They lived there for a decent little while. But Tim Tebow's mother, while they were in the Philippines, contracted amoebic dysentery, which apparently can be caught in the Philippines and not only on the Oregon Trail. But it was very, very serious to the point that she went into a coma for a little bit. As they were getting her out of the coma as she was recovering from this dysentery, they found out that she was pregnant. She had gotten pregnant before she got ill, and now they found out when she's recovering that, hey, she's pregnant. And these medications she was on caused what they call severe placental abruption. And the doctors there fully expected the child that she had to not make it. They were expecting it to be a stillborn baby, and to avoid the pain and everything, they suggested an abortion, which was illegal in the Philippines, even for medical reasons. But they suggested it. They were willing to do it, and she told them absolutely no way. If the child is stillborn, then that's just what was meant to be. She decides she's not going to have the abortion. She's going to see this pregnancy out. So this baby that was supposed to be stillborn, was not expected to survive, arrives in late 1987, and that baby was one Tim Tebow. So overcoming the odds from the beginning. He grew up. He suffers from dyslexia, which has always given him problems, but he went on to become a great student. Pretty much, I mean, he ended up being academic All-American once he did get to Florida. But dyslexia is just something else he had to overcome. But he didn't have to overcome that in a public school setting because all the Tebow children were homeschooled. Now, eventually they left the Philippines, moved into Jacksonville, Florida. And when Tim got about the age to play high school football, the law in Florida allowed homeschooled kids to be able to play football for a school. And if they were in that school's district, they could play for that school even though they didn't go to school there. So Tebow actually, his freshman year, went to Trinity Christian Academy in Jacksonville, played as tight end there his freshman year, wanted to be quarterback. The coach there was not going to let him be quarterback. And this was a really good school. It was a private school. They had loads of talent, and they had talent at quarterback. But Tebow's pure athleticism, they wanted him to be a tight end. Well, he wanted to play quarterback. So before his sophomore year, his family moved to St. Johns County, and he started playing. He was still homeschooled, but he started playing football for Allen D. Nease High School, which was like a terrible high school football program. They had losing records for several years. I don't know. I can't remember if they'd ever had a winning season, but they hadn't lately. But the coach there had talked with Tim and was going to let him come in and play quarterback. And that's what Tebow wanted to do. So people were telling him he couldn't play quarterback, even at a young age. But he went on to Nease High School. His junior year, he really rose to national prominence with his passing ability, his running ability. He was a fantastic dual threat quarterback, and he showed insane competitiveness. As a matter of fact, in one of his games, his junior year, he got hurt he got hurt in the second quarter. Something was wrong with his leg, and he thought that he had maybe pulled a muscle, done something. It was really hurting him, but he played the rest of the game. Found out afterwards he had broken his fibia and played the entire second half on a broken leg, which included a 29-yard touchdown scamper with a broken leg, just to show the toughness, the competitiveness of Tim Tebow. He won Florida's Player of the Year that year. That was his junior year. He went into his senior year. And Allen D. Nease High School, that was a perennial loser till he got there, won the state title his senior year. Tebow was named All-State. He was named Mr. Football. He repeated as Florida Player of the Year, and he was invited to play in the U.S. Army All-American Bowl. As a matter of fact, he was such a good player in high school. In 2007, he was listed on the Florida State Athletic Association their all-century team, naming the top 33 players to ever play high school football in the state of Florida. And as we all know, there's a lot of good football talent that comes out of the state of Florida. So the fact that he was on that team spoke volumes. Now, as you can imagine, these kind of stats, these kind of stories, he was a pretty highly touted recruit coming out of Florida. And you would think that his parents were Florida grads. They met at Florida. It's a shoe-in. He's going to go to Florida, but it wasn't a shoe-in. It literally came down to the 11th hour. Urban Meyer did not know Tim Tebow was committing to Florida until Tim Tebow said on the stage and put on the Florida hat and said he was going to Florida. He almost went to Alabama. Crazy to think what that would have been like. But it was a pretty fierce battle between Florida and Alabama. And Florida came out with that one. It wouldn't be the first one that they came out with in Tebow's years, but they also didn't take all of them, which we'll talk about later. But Tebow commits to the University of Florida, and history is set in motion.
Before I turn the floor over to you, Bennett, our resident fact checker, me, looked into the two-a-days claim. Nice High School did not go perfect his last year. They lost to Hoover, who was coming off 3 consecutive state championships in Alabama. And he was on the very first episode of two-a-days. About that.
Well, he won the state title.
He did.
They didn't lose nobody in Florida.
That is true. Just Alabama, as he would his last year at the University of Florida as well. So we'll get into that later.
Junior year.
Bennett, I guess you're going to be taking us way back in time for Mr. Staubach. So take us in your time machine and take us back in time.
As I usually do. Take us back in time a little bit. Actually, a way back, but it's okay. He's born Roger Thomas Staubach. He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio on February 5th, 1942. He would be the only child of Robert and Elizabeth Staubach. Now, growing up, Roger was in the Boy Scouts and he loved sports. He was a diehard Cincinnati Reds fan. In high school, he played quite a bit of sports. He played baseball, basketball, and football. He did all this while attending an all-boys Catholic school named Purcell High School, which is in Cincinnati. He showed a lot of promise as a baseball player, actually. I would say probably that was his best sport in high school. And starting out in football, he was a wide receiver and a defensive back. But his head football coach had saw him play baseball. He noticed him, and he noticed he had a really great arm. And he's like, hey, you're going to try out to play quarterback. And at first, Roger didn't really want to be quarterback. He's like, oh, well, I don't know, maybe. And the head coach was like, no, you are going to be quarterback. I insist that you be quarterback. So senior year rolls around, and he is the starting quarterback for this Purcell High School. He leads the team to an 8-2 record, and they finished 9th overall in the state. He was voted the Cincinnati Player of the Year. And fun fact, too, he played against another Hall of Fame great, Paul Warfield, in the North versus South All-Star game. Now, a second. Okay. Now, after high school, Roger, he wanted to go to Notre Dame, coming from the Catholic high school background. And since he'd really only started that 1 year as quarterback for his high school team, he didn't really get a whole lot of attention from schools, at least not from big name schools. And so he was very, very much interested in Notre Dame, but they were definitely not interested in him. which I think was probably a decision that they would later go on to regret. So with Notre Dame out of the picture, he decides that he's going to enroll at Purdue. But as fate would have it, there was a Naval Academy recruiter that had become really interested into having Staubach come and play for the midshipmen. He had seen him play throughout the season, and they really liked him, so they wanted him to come and play for Navy. And at first, he didn't really seem too interested in the Naval Academy. But, as recruiters do, they were super persistent. So Roger was like, okay, sure, I'll give it a whirl. And so he made the trip to Annapolis. So when he arrives there, he gets to look around, and he really likes what he's seeing from the school, particularly the academy's like really strong moral environment that they have. So he decides he's not going to go to Purdue and that he is going to enroll at the Naval Academy, which is what he does in 1961. So he's on the freshman team, and I guess they have like just a team dedicated just to the freshmen, at least back at this time at the Naval Academy. So he's playing quarterback for the freshman squad, and he leads them to a 9-1 record, which would go on to be a sign of great things to come for Roger and Navy.
So what you're telling me is 24/7 Sports and Rivals didn't really have a recruiting profile for Mr. Staubach back in the day.
I don't think so. I think he came on the scene there way too late as a quarterback and kind of flew under the radar there.
He did. Well, if you're going to be quarterback at high-profile institutions and college, you live for the big game. So, Bennett, tell me about the biggest games that Roger Staubach played during his time at Navy.
Yeah, his biggest games would come during the 1962 season and definitely the 1963 season. In 1962, he began the season as the low man on the totem pole. He was the fourth string quarterback. But there was a couple of injuries to a couple other guys, and that's what fate would have it. Roger found himself with a huge chance to kind of show what he had as he got to come in and play in the fourth game of the season against Cornell. So what he does is he takes this opportunity and shows them what he can do. He orchestrates 6 touchdown drives and a 41-0 blowout. He had 99 yards passing, 88 yards rushing, 2 passing touchdowns, and 1 rushing touchdown. Pretty well balanced. I know those stats don't leap out at you, but you got to think too, this is back in the early 60s. Definitely not as high gear of a offense as we have now. I mean, back then you could have a DB that could like completely wipe out a receiver and no flag, nail the quarterback. It's okay. You good? How many fingers am I holding up?
I like those rules.
That's close enough. Yeah, get up. You're good. Now, the biggest game that he had in 1962 would come 6 weeks later, the final week of the season, the very famous Army versus Navy matchup. Now, this was particularly a big game as President John F. Kennedy was in attendance for this game, along with about another 100,000 people that had showed up to watch this game. And Staubach definitely did not disappoint. He put on a show for the crowd. He put on a show for the president. He had 2 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. And supposedly, from the information that I've got, I didn't see it in person, so I don't know. But supposedly, one of those rushing touchdowns was a 21-yard run where he evaded all 11 defenders and scored a touchdown. Now, by the time the game was over, John F. Kennedy could have quite possibly had been the biggest Roger Staubach fan. It's well documented that he famously said to one of his aides, he said, there ought to be 20 of them just like him out there. So they go on, they beat Army, huge upset for Navy. And in 1963, he takes it up a notch and he becomes the best player in the country. He led Navy to victories over West Virginia, victory over Michigan and an upset over the number 3 ranked Pittsburgh. In 1963, he was able to also get revenge on another one of their rivals that we'll talk about some later, Notre Dame. He did this on November 2nd. It was a tight game in the first half. It was 7-7, back and forth, and Roger and his men come out in the second half, and they took care of business, and they routed Notre Dame 35-14. So he was able to get his revenge on Notre Dame there for pretty much just ignoring him when he wanted to come to their school. And this win also kept his Heisman campaign alive, even though Roger, he's not really the type to worry about, personal accolades like that. But his coach and his teammates certainly were. The story goes that during the halftime, the coach comes out in the locker room and is telling the guys, he's like, look, it's tied 7-7. We have a chance to win this game and win it for Roger and keep his Heisman hopeful chance alive, which I'm sure probably embarrassed him. Another big thing about this, with them beating Notre Dame, this would be the last time that they beat Notre Dame until 2007, which was some 44 years later. 3 weeks later, after the Notre Dame game, President John F. Kennedy, as we know, was tragically assassinated. And there was a lot of speculation that the Army and Navy game would be canceled. But his wife, Jackie, said that President Kennedy would have wanted the game to go on. So they decided to play the game anyways. And so you've got, the nation mourning the death of the president, and Navy and Army, they suit up and go out there and play this game, which really meant a lot for the country right now to have your armed forces men go out there and play a game, with everything going on. Navy would go on to win 21-15. And I think this is a really important game for America because it was a way for Americans to kind of escape reality for, a little while and kind of help with the healing process.
Yeah.
They finished the regular season 9-1 that year. And when it was all said and done, they were ranked number 2 in the country, having outscored their opponents 105-20. They earned a bid to the Cotton Bowl to play in the NCAA championship against number 1 ranked Texas. And in that game, Staubach set records for completions with 21. 21 completions was a record in the Cotton Bowl in 1963. And he set a record for passing yards in the Cotton Bowl with 228. Navy, they fell short in the big game, but the 1963 season was one of unprecedented success for Navy, and the likes of which that haven't been replicated since for the team. And the main reason for that success is because of Staubach and his talent and his leadership to the team.
All right. Well, take us closer to modern day and tell me about the biggest gains for one Tim Tebow. I was at his coming out party in 2006, I must say, where he ruined
to that game in a minute. In another category, there's a couple games that would probably be categorized as his biggest games, but I'm going to hit on those in another category of tonight. But looking at some other big games, I know you're talking about that Tennessee game, and that was kind of, hey, this guy might have something. But another game a couple weeks after that, his freshman year, is really what showed the world and was really his coming out party. And that was against LSU. It was 2 top 5 teams in that game. Of course, Tebow, his freshman year, was coming in sporadically. Chris Leak was the man there, but Tebow would come in on special packages. That game against LSU, he had 9 rushes for 35 yards and a touchdown, but he also threw the ball that game. He had 2 passes. He was 2 for 2 for 36 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. He had 2 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown, including his first passing touchdown of his career, which is a little bit famous, where he took the snap, ran to the line, jumped in the air, and threw what is infamously known now as the jump pass to take Casey from the 1-yard line. That was his first touchdown pass as a Gator. He also hit Bubba Caldwell for a 35-yard touchdown in that game. So that was really what put him on the map on a national level. Fast forward to the end of his freshman year. They're in the BCS championship game. Of course, this was Chris Leak finally getting his title in his senior year on his way out. But Tebow contributed to that game as well. He only had 1 passing attempt, but that was a 1-yard touchdown pass to Bubba Caldwell. But he also had 10 rushes for 39 yards and a rushing touchdown. So even as the backup quarterback, still attributed for 2 touchdowns in that national championship victory over the Ohio State Buckeyes. Troy who? Moving into his sophomore year, when he was the full-time guy, one game that really sticks out, this was his Heisman Trophy winning year, was a game against the old ball coach. When Spurrier was at South Carolina, on the other sideline, Tebow had one of the biggest games of his career, and a game that really kind of locked him into that Heisman Trophy. He went 22 of 32 passing for 302 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's a pretty good day. But then you look at the fact that he also had 120 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns for 7 total touchdowns against the Gamecocks. Really solidified him as the best player in the country that year. And, of course, he would go on to be rewarded for that and became the first sophomore to ever win the Heisman Trophy. His junior year, arguably, and in my opinion, his best year at Florida. The national championship, or the SEC championship that year against Alabama. He had 216 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. He also had 57 rushing yards. A game that a lot of people were picking Alabama coming into that game. It was an undefeated Alabama. It was Nick Saban's first big year. An undefeated Alabama against an 11-1 Florida team, and Florida handled them pretty well in that game to advance to Tebow's second BCS title game, this time as the quarterback, the only quarterback. And after that SEC championship game against Alabama was a Heisman Trophy ceremony, which Tebow did not win, which I will get to later on. But
Sam Bradford, baby. Sam Bradford.
Sam Bradford was named the Heisman Trophy winner. Sam Bradford played for the Oklahoma Sooners. Sam Bradford and his Oklahoma Sooners met the Gators in the national championship game. And I'll tell you, Sam Bradford didn't look like the better quarterback that night. He was decent. He had 2 touchdowns, but he had 2 interceptions. Tebow also 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in the air, but he threw for 231 yards. He ran for 109 yards in that game. And when we look at that, he had 22 rushes. 7 of those rushes went for first downs. 3 of them came on third down. He ran all over the Sooners defense, and Florida went on to win their second national championship in his tenure there. Then the last big game I'm going to talk about in this section is his very last game as a collegiate quarterback for Florida. Another disappointment. There was a disappointment in the Heisman his junior year. There was a disappointment in the SEC championship his senior year, which I'll get to in a minute. So his last game of his career is a pissed-off Tim Tebow against a probably wish they weren't there Cincinnati Bearcats in the Sugar Bowl that year, where Tebow in his last game had his career high in passing yardage. He went 31 of 35 for 482 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. He also had 51 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown in his very last game as a Gator. Went out as only Tim Tebow can, the best.
You know, But aside from those 4 heartbreaks that I suffered by the hands of Mr. Tebow, the one game I remember most came from his sophomore year in Death Valley. It was a loss, but it seemed like the entire offense, it's basically Tim Tebow versus LSU in that game. And LSU had to convert 4 fourth downs in that game to beat him. But it was like he was going against the entire LSU team. And the other game I remember is the cocktail party. Can we call it the cocktail party anymore? Where Georgia runs their entire team out on the field. I know what happens the next year.
No, it was his sophomore year. Yes, we can call it the cocktail party because it'll always be the cocktail party. B, we will discuss that more in just a minute.
Okay.
You know what game I remember?
What's that?
The game when Tebow ran over Eric Berry.
Oh no, that was an immovable object and an irresistible force.
Who fell backwards?
Did you not see the instant replay?
Who fell backwards?
Yeah.
No, they both went backwards.
No.
It was like 2 trains collide is what that was like. That's what it was. Go back and look at the tape. Look at the tape.
Hey, when I sent out the email to send out the format for this week's show, I believe there's a still photograph in that email that might have accidentally found its way there. But I believe it's that exact hit Bennett is talking about. And I believe Mr. Berry is doing this.
That's at one angle. That picture only tells part of the story.
Falling backwards is the same at any angle.
You got to look at the video. The video is what matters.
Pull it up. This is why we need a producer.
This is why we need a producer. So we're putting a classified ad out now. Look,
I'm going to use that this year for Florida State when they get destroyed all season long. Well, that's just one angle.
It's just one angle.
Oh.
All right, Rod. Let's try to get this thing back on the tracks. Tell me about Tebow versus the primary rivals for the University of Florida.
Those Florida State versus Miami wide rights were all just one angle.
That's just one angle, okay?
You guys.
All right. Well, when you talk about playing your rivals, you talk about getting ready for that big game. That was Tim Tebow. Florida's 3 biggest rivalries. University of Tennessee, Mr. Elrod's favorite team. Florida State University, Mr. Bennett's favorite team, and those dastardly Georgia Bulldogs. In 4 years against those 3 teams, Tim Tebow went 11-1 against those 3 teams. Tennessee, 4-0. But to Tennessee's credit, I'm going to give Tennessee some credit here.
Hey, what? Do we need to record this? Yeah,
honestly, we are recording. When you look at the 3 rivals, Tennessee, he still did pretty daggum well. 4-0, he performed well in those games. It's not like he didn't show up, but Tennessee gave him the hardest times of any of those 3 teams. The only interception he threw against a rival was against Tennessee. Georgia never picked him off in 4 years. Florida State never picked him off in 4 years. Tennessee only did once in 4 years, but they did it once. He had 189 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns against Tennessee in his career. Granted, some of those came at I think the game you're talking about, 2006, his freshman year. Tennessee's winning. It's 20-14, late in the 4th quarter. Florida's driving, 3rd and 8. Chris Leak escapes the pocket, has a beautiful run, slides down after 7 yards. It's 4th and 1, late in the 4th quarter. You put in the freshman quarterback and let him run over somebody. And that's exactly what he did. He converted that 4th down, and 2 plays later, Chris Leak, 2, Dallas Baker, the touchdown maker. Florida went on to win that game 21-20. And I do just want to point out one thing to Mr. Elrod that I've pointed out before. There's a lot of guys that come in as highly touted freshman quarterbacks that will play every down. And Tebow in most schools would have started his freshman year. But the senior on that team was Chris Leak. And I'm going to say something. I don't have Rona. I just got a call. I'm going to say something that might be controversial to some people, but I stand by it, and I am a little biased. Chris Leak is the most underrated college quarterback of all time. All right, whose jersey you got on there?
Oh, gosh. I know where you're going with this.
Whose
Are you going
jersey
to
you
try to
got
make
on?
the argument Chris Leak is better than
Whose
Peyton?
jersey do you have on?
Sir Peyton Manning.
And Peyton Manning, rightly so, is regarded as one of the best college quarterbacks of all time. Am I right?
Yes.
He was the number 1 overall draft pick when he came out of Tennessee. He's a very highly touted quarterback, and I'm only saying this here and one time only. It was deservedly so. There. So now that is said, pass completions, Chris Leak or Peyton Manning? Chris Leak. Passing yards, Chris Leak or Peyton Manning? Chris Leak. Passing touchdowns, Peyton Manning by 1. Chris Leak did it for 2 years under Ron freaking Zook, his freshman and sophomore years, and he was splitting snaps with Ingle Martin his freshman year. Chris Leak was a fantastic quarterback. So Tebow still got quite a bit of playing time, even playing behind Chris Leak his freshman year. Anyway, just had to get that off my chest. Let's move on.
Tom's Peyton Manning was pulled in favor of a freshman quarterback, 0. Chris Leak, 1.
And if Tennessee had Tim Tebow behind Peyton Manning, it might have been a different story. They weren't going to put in Todd Helton. Anyway, moving on to Florida State. Bennett, I'm sorry, but Florida State was not at its best during Tebow's years in games.
Those were some down years for us.
Some down years.
That was towards the end of Bowden era.
Yeah,
we had seen better days.
But Tebow against Florida State, 4-0, 262 rushing yards over those years for 5 touchdowns. He did not attempt to pass against Florida State his freshman year, but those last 3 years, he had 668 yards over those 3 games, 9 touchdown passes to no interceptions. He did and every time I think of Tebow versus Florida State, I think of that image where it was raining in Tallahassee and he had been tackled into the paint it may have been the end zone or it was at midfield. Probably the end zone, judging by how he played against Florida State. But he came up. Florida's wearing the white jerseys, and his whole right side is red from the paint that had come off the wet grass onto him. But it's an iconic image. Then we move to the Georgia Bulldogs. He lost a game to the Georgia Bulldogs in his sophomore year. The 2008 game or the 2007 game, he lost to the Georgia Bulldogs. And that game is infamous for, as Elrod said, Georgia scores. The entire team, Georgia's team, leaves the sidelines and is dancing in the end zone. And I don't even remember who it was, the big fat defensive lineman doing his little dance there. And Mark Richt standing on the sidelines, he let it happen. You know who did not forget that moment? Tim Tebow and Urban Meyer. Fast forward to the next year, Tebow runs for 3 touchdowns, passes for 2 touchdowns. Florida is up 35-3 late in the fourth quarter. Tim Tebow is still in the game and still throwing the ball, including a 25-yard pass to Percy Harvin. Florida went on to win that game 49-10 as a big revenge to Georgia. So, but against his rivals, Tennessee, Florida State, Georgia, 11-1, and he made up big for that one the next year.
All right, Bennett, tell me about Roger Staubach versus his rivals. I seem you're going to talk a lot about Army.
Yeah. I'd say Navy, at least back in the early '60s, their biggest rivals were Maryland, Notre Dame, and of course Army. For Maryland, these two teams, they don't really face off every year. It's kind of more of a sporadic thing, but they are in-state rivals. So whenever they do meet up, it's what they call the Crab Bowl Classic. Now Notre Dame, back in the day, the contests were a lot closer. I guess that's why they were such big rivals. But as of late, of course, Notre Dame has dominated that rivalry. They went on that 43 consecutive victories from '64 to 2007. Um, and of course, you've got Army. These two always play the last week of the season. It's known as one of college football's greatest traditions, one of the greatest rivalries, mainly because these two teams are playing solely for the love of the game. They're not playing for stats or accolades, or really not even playing to increase their draft stock. Vast majority of these athletes finish out their college career at this game before they go and serve their country. It's really something really special to watch on TV in December when you watch Navy and Army play against each other. Starting in 1962, since it didn't really play any in '61, um, Navy fell to a better Notre Dame squad that year, 20-12. But they did have the huge upset win over Army, 34-14. That's the one where JFK was in attendance. They didn't play Maryland that year. 1963 is when Staubach and company saw a lot more success. They won big over all three of their rivals. They steamrolled Maryland 42-7. They upset Notre Dame with that second half surgence that I talked about. They rolled 35-14, which I talked about before would be the last time that they beat them in like 43, 44 years, something like that. They also defeated Army 21-15, as I talked about before, when the nation was still in shock and mourning over the assassination of President Kennedy. 1964, just to be honest, was not a very good year for Navy, and was not a very good year for Roger Staubach either. He battled injuries throughout the entire season, and they went 0-3 against their rivals that year. They lost to Maryland 27-22. They got killed 40-0 against the number 2 ranked Notre Dame, and they were just barely edged 11-8 to Army, which finished out a very abysmal injury-plagued season for Staubach. He got injured in the first game, and then he would miss the next 4 games. So that's half the season already that he lost. And then when he came back, it seemed like he would just have bad luck with an injury here or a nagging injury there. But when he was healthy enough to play, he still finished out the season with a very respectful 101.6 quarterback rating. So 62, 1 win, 1 loss. 63 went 3-0. They swept, and then 64 is probably one that he'd like to forget. He went 0-3. So that was his time against his rivals.
All right, we've talked about the biggest games. We talked a lot about the records and against the rivals for both of these men. But tell me, Bennett, tell me about the accomplishments that Roger had at his time in Annapolis.
Yeah, he actually enjoyed several accomplishments during his time at the Naval Academy, starting in '62. Following their upset over Army, Staubach had the honor to meet President Kennedy. After the game, I guess President Kennedy was wanting to meet him there on the field, and Staubach was on the record saying that he was a nervous wreck having to meet the president. He said he doesn't remember anything that President Kennedy had said or did to him while they're on the field. I guess I probably would too, but you get to meet the president of the United States there on the field, and I'm sure I wouldn't know what to think or what to say or anything like that either. 63 in particular was a really huge year for Roger. We talked about before, he led Navy to a 9-1 regular season record with that crazy number 2 national ranking for Navy. And at the end of the season, here are a few of his accomplishments, awards, accolades, whatever you want to call it. He was a consensus All-American, which coincidentally enough, in 1963, Forrest Gump was also named an All-American. That is the year that Forrest Gump was named an All-American, where he drank 15 Dr. Peppers and told President Kennedy that he had to go pee. Also, Staubach won the Maxwell Award, and he won the Heisman Award by a landslide. It was one of the largest margins ever for the Heisman Trophy Award. He was also, at the time, just the 4th non-senior at the time to win the Heisman. He was a junior. He also won the Chick Harley Award, which is presented to college football's Player of the Year. And he was named Sporting News' Player of the Year. He finished out the year with 128 pass completions, which doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards because we're so ingrained to these prolific offenses, but that was number 4 in the country at the time. He had a 66.7 pass completion percentage, which was number 1 in the country. 1,702 passing yards, number 4 in the country. And a 145.9 passer rating, which was good also for number 4 in the NCAA. He had 9 rushing touchdowns, which ranked him number 9 among all players. That includes running backs too. So he was 9th in rushing touchdowns. And he had 2,073 total yards, which was good for 3rd best in the entire country. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And he was set to be on the cover of Life magazine. But at the time when they were going to publish the issue, of course, that's when President Kennedy was assassinated. So they nixed Staubach on the cover. And, of course, they put the assassination on the cover instead, which rightfully so, of course. He set 28 Naval Academy football records. He was the recipient of the Thompson Trophy Cup for 3 straight years, making him the only individual to receive this trophy 3 times for Navy. He was the 1965 winner of the Naval Academy Athletic Association Sword. So he became just the 4th person to win both of these naval awards, the Thompson Trophy Cup and the Naval Academy Athletic Association Sword. That's just the 4th person to win both of those since the year 1900. He had his number 12 jersey retired by the Naval Academy, and he was elected to the College Football Hall of Fame in 1981. The football locker room in Rickett Hall was named in his honor in 1996, and he was honored as a distinguished graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He's named to the Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium All-Stadium Team, and also named to the Walter Camp All-Century Team. And lastly, in 2008, he was awarded the National Football Foundation Gold Medal, which is the highest honor that one can receive from this organization. So not bad, not bad.
Not bad at all. All right, tell me about Tim Tebow's accomplishments at Gainesville, Florida.
Well, his freshman year, he was named to the SEC All-Freshman team. And that was just the beginning. I'm just kind of going to go through these kind of quickly. This is not the extent because we don't have the time. This is the highlights. But Tim Tebow, two-time national champion, first sophomore to win the Heisman Trophy, two-time Maxwell Award winner, only the second player ever to do that, the first being Archie Griffin, and thus being the first quarterback to ever do that. He was a two-time SEC champion, two-time SEC Player of the Year. He won the Davey O'Brien Award for Best Quarterback in 2007. He was the AP Player of the Year in 2007. He was a Sporting News Player of the Year in 2007. He was 3 times a Heisman Trophy finalist, meaning he made 3 trips to Radio City Music Hall for the celebration. He was a 2-time first-team All-American his sophomore and his junior years. In his senior year, he slacked off and was only a second-team All-American. 3 times first-team All-SEC his sophomore through his senior year. And like I said, he was freshman on the all-freshman team his freshman year. And in 2010, Sports Illustrated named him College Player of the Decade. At the end of Tebow's college career, he held 5 NCAA records, 14 SEC records, and 28 University of Florida records, which, okay, yeah, he's the best the school ever had, but the school had already had 2 Heisman-winning quarterbacks before him in Steve Spurrier and Danny Warfel. When he graduated from an NCAA, the entire NCAA perspective, he finished 2nd in career passing efficiency, 3rd in pass yards per attempt over his career, 8th in career rushing touchdowns, not by a quarterback, just 8th in career rushing touchdowns, period. He also owns a record for the most consecutive games in which he threw for and ran for a touchdown pass. He did that for 14 straight games. And that was broken up by Tennessee. Congratulations.
Get up, Volunteers.
Granted, he still ran for a touchdown in that game, but he didn't throw for one. So
Was that the Lane Kiffin game?
I don't remember. I think so. I think it might have been because I think that streak – I'm pretty sure that streak started in the national championship game his freshman year and went all through his sophomore year.
The entire world thought that, Urban Meyer and Tim Tebow were going to knock the wheels off Lane Kiffin, and they won, but it was like bittersweet. It's like, no one died in this game.
What killed me about that was Kiffin talked all that smack, and he didn't try to win that game. He tried not to lose that game.
Beat the spread.
But anyway, that was at the NCAA level. At the SEC level, of course, I think me and Elrod would argue is the greatest conference in college football historically. Bennett might have an argument otherwise, but either way you look at it, he finished his career as the all-time leader in career passing efficiency in the SEC. He finished as the all-time leader in completion percentage in the SEC at 67.1. So over 2/3 of his passes were completed. He finished his career with the highest touchdown to interception ratio in SEC history, with 5.5 touchdowns to every interception. He finished with the most rushing yards by a quarterback with 2,947 yards. And he also finished as the SEC leader in rushing touchdowns, period, breaking Herschel Walker's record against Georgia when he tied and broke that record in that game after the loss the year before. So suck it, Mark Richt. And he also finished as the all-time SEC leader in total touchdowns responsible for. So much like Roger Staubach, not a bad career.
Question. If Florida beats Alabama in the SEC championship game in 2009, does Tim Tebow win the Heisman over Mark Ingram?
No, not his senior year. Mark Ingram had a better year. Tebow knew he didn't. I'll get into that in just a minute.
All right. You kind of alluded to that. Take me – we've talked about the highs, but in a given player's career, they're going to have some lows. Take me – and I'm excited for this. Tell me about the low points for Tim Tebow. I'm loving this.
I'm sure you are. Well, as I've said, I think Tim Tebow's best year was his junior year. The team was definitely the best it ever was. 2008 team is probably the best team Florida's ever had. That 2000
had a lot of criminals.
And a racist, but that 2006 team probably is near and dear to my heart, but that 2008 team was probably more talented. And I do think that was Tebow's best year. But granted, when I think of the weaknesses and the low points of Tim Tebow's game, I think of three things. And two of those came in that junior year. But of course, he turned all these negatives into positives. But the first negative is the 2008 game against Ole Miss. They go to Oxford. They're heavily favored. Tebow himself has a really good game. He's 24 for 38, throws for 319 yards and a touchdown. But he's always been able to run the ball and run over people, and Ole Miss was all over him that game. His offensive line failed him. He did run for 2 touchdowns in that game, but he finished that game with only 7 rushing yards. More specifically, they're down 31-30 late in the game. They're down by a point. They're in Ole Miss territory. 4th and 1. You've got the best guy in maybe the history of college football for that spot. And Tebow got stuffed. Didn't convert the 4th down. Florida goes to Oxford, which they're going to do this weekend as well. But they go to Oxford in 2008 and lose.
I thought that was a home game for you all.
I'm pretty sure it was in Oxford. It might have been a home game, but
I think it's what made it sweeter. It was a home game for you all. Seeing Houston Nutt and Ole Miss, Dexter McCluster coming in, Jevin Sneed coming into Gainesville and giving you a big fat L.
Maybe it was.
The fact checker.
Yeah. Where's the fact check? We need a fact checker and a producer. Does anybody work for free? Because we don't have any money to pay you right now.
No, we don't pay him.
In that low point, Tebow gave one of, if not the most memorable post-game press conferences of all time. And it was one of those that you see it when he makes it and you think, dang, that guy, he's a good speech giver. He's motivated. But to see what they did the rest of the year after that speech is what makes it so iconic. So iconic, in fact, one of my best friends in the entire world, Mr. Brian Bennett, a few years ago for Christmas, gave me a framed photo that he had made with the words of this press conference on it. And I was going to pull it out and show it on the show, but it's in a box in the closet because we're having a baby and I had to move a lot of my stuff out of the way. But here's what Tebow said in that press conference that has now gone on to become the promise. This is after this disappointing loss to Ole Miss. Tim Tebow sat down at the table and said this: I just want to say one thing. To the fans and everybody in Gator Nation, I'm sorry, extremely sorry. I promise you one thing, a lot of good will come out of this. You will never see any player in the entire country play as hard as I will play the rest of the season, and you will never see someone push the rest of the team as hard as I will push everybody the rest of the season, and you will never see a team play harder than we will play the rest of the season. God bless. they went on to run the gauntlet the rest of the year and went to the national championship game and won the national championship game. A national championship game where they played the Oklahoma Sooners. That again goes into the second low point, the second disappointment, the second weakness of Tim Tebow's career, and that is the 2008 Heisman Trophy that he should have won. He finished with more first-place votes than any of the other competitors in that Heisman Trophy vote. But he still finished third in Heisman Trophy voting, which is ridiculous. The most first-place votes, but he finished third because a lot of people were either voting Tebow first or third and then voting Sam Bradford, Colt McCoy, who both had good years. But when you look at the numbers, yes, Bradford and McCoy had more passing yards, quite a bit more passing yards. They also both had nearly double the pass attempts that Tim Tebow had. And when you look at rushing yards, Tim Tebow had 673 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns. Colt McCoy had 500 some odd rushing yards. Sam Bradford had 47. Okay, Sam Bradford's not a running quarterback. I get that. But look at the defenses. What was the running joke of Big 12 defenses in the early 2000s?
What defense?
They didn't exist. Colt McCoy and Sam Bradford basically got to go out and play catch with their receivers on most Saturdays. They played each other. Oklahoma and Texas had defensive talent. Texas Tech had a good offense that year. They didn't really have a defense. He didn't play any defenses. Look at what Tebow had to go through in 2008. The SEC, which is the Eric Berrys of the world, were in the SEC in 2008. Georgia, LSU, all stacked defenses in 2008. He played Alabama, an undefeated Alabama team in the SEC championship that year. Tim Tebow, when you look at the stats, well, Bradford and McCoy had more passing yards and more touchdowns, so I guess they should win. But if you look at the eyeball test on who the best quarterback, who the best player in the country that year was, it was without a doubt Tim Tebow. But, okay, he lost. He should have won. He was pissed about it. And lo and behold, he gets to play Sam Bradford and those Oklahoma Sooners a few weeks later in the BCS championship, and he came out all right. He made up for that. The one he didn't get to completely get to make up for, the lowest, probably his lowest point in his career at Florida, his senior year. Florida has never in their history, they've got 3 national championships, 3 Heisman Trophy winners. They have never in their history had an undefeated season. Florida rolls into Atlanta in 2009 at 12-0. They're undefeated, going up against Alabama for a chance to go to another national championship, a chance at that undefeated season. Tebow did not have a bad game that game against Alabama. He had 247 rushing yards. He had a touchdown in that game. He ran for 63 yards against an extremely tough Alabama defense, but Mark Ingram, Florida's defense could not stop him. And they lost that game in a game that really wasn't that even that close once you got into the second half. Alabama trounced them pretty good. It was 32-13 was the final score. A lot of people have made fun of Tebow throughout the years because he cried after that game. I cried after that game.
Tears. Juicy tears.
I didn't even play in that game, and I cried after that game. There was a lot of hard work that went into that. The team hadn't lost since he made that speech the year before, the September of the year before against Ole Miss. The team hadn't lost since then going into that game. And they lose the shot at the national championship. And like I said, he only had one more game in his career after that. And poor Cincinnati somehow found themselves into a BCS bowl and probably regret it.
Yeah. There have nightmares about Tim Tebow for years to come. I was kind of happy that you all lost to Alabama that game, but that game was the start of the Alabama dynasty. If we can go back in time, I wouldn't mind seeing you all win and getting trounced by whoever, or Texas. You'd play Texas in the Rose Bowl.
Colt McCoy.
That's how 2009 should have went.
How sweet would it have been for Tebow to beat Bradford in 08, McCoy in 09, and tell the Heisman voters to stick it? Because here's the thing. He didn't win the Heisman his senior year. He shouldn't have. His numbers weren't as good. He was not – his sophomore and junior year were better than his senior years. Mark Ingram deserved it. Tebow said the week before the Heisman Trophy celebration, Mark Ingram deserves it, but I'm going to go have fun in New York City. And he talks about going to New York for that with no pressure for the first time. His sophomore year, he knew he should have won it, and he was nervous. His junior year, he knew he should have won it, and he was nervous. His senior year, he knew he wasn't going to win. He just went and had fun and hung out with Mark Ingram all weekend.
All right, Bennett, tell me about the low points for Roger Staubach during his time at Navy.
Yeah, but before I get into that, I'm going to have to agree with Rhett when he said that Tebow's the promise speech is one of the most iconic moments in college football sports. I saw you shaking your head. I'm going to have to agree with it. If you actually watch that whole entire interview, I think it's like, I don't know, however long it is. Throughout the first of, you could tell he's like almost kind of in a state of shock. He's kind of having a hard time coming up with the words that he wants to say. And just the whole time he's talking about how, he thought, that they would come back and they played a pretty good game, and that they knew they were going to go down and score there at the end, and he didn't really know what happened. And then he just blurts out that iconic promise there at the very end.
I'll say this, but before you get into this, it helps to have the talent that Tim Tebow had in 2008. If you look at that decade, probably second to 2001 Miami in terms of total talent that Florida had that year. An immense amount of talent. So the promise helped, but so did the talent around him helped as well.
You know what's crazy? The seniors on that team were recruited by Ron Zook.
Fire Zook.
I hated that man, and then we got Muschamp, and then we got old Butter Teeth after him, and after that, I missed Ron Zook for a little bit.
Oh, isn't Ron Zook like a quarterback's coach in Green Bay, or is he done gone now?
He's probably still in playbook somewhere, I'm sure, out there.
Fact checker again.
I'll say this: Ron Zook was a great recruiter. X's and O's, he was awful, but he was a great recruiter.
All right, back to Staubach. His weaknesses, there were a few of them. One that was surprising to me was that his career at Navy was almost over before it even started, as he was almost expelled from the academy. His freshman year, he became really, really homesick, and he was having a really hard time adjusting to the Naval Academy lifestyle. In the first 4 months that he was on campus, he received 150 demerits, which put him at the halfway mark towards being kicked out. So he goes on Christmas break and does a lot of soul searching, and he comes back after Christmas break with a new attitude and a new outlook, and he was able to drastically cut back on those demerits. I think he only had like 20 after Christmas his freshman year, and obviously he wasn't kicked out. So that was a way for him to kind of, like Mr. Tim Tebow, kind of turn a negative into a positive. Another kind of low point in Staubach's collegiate career was their loss to Texas in the Cotton Bowl in that 1963 championship game. Whether we like to admit or not, we tend to measure players on championships, and even if they have an illustrious career, if they don't get that national championship, it's almost like it kind of devalues their career. It doesn't really boost their legacy so much as it would. So I think that if they would have found a way to pull out another upset like they had done all year long, that could have really put Staubach more in the conversation than he is now as one of the better collegiate quarterbacks of all time. Still in 1963, that 9-1 record, of course, that one sticks out like a sore thumb. That was a loss to SMU in the fourth game of the season. They'd almost pulled out the victory, but lost 32-28. Like this was their only blemish. Staubach actually injured his shoulder in the game. I think he separated his shoulder in that game, and it's well documented that SMU was out to actually knock him out of the game, which they didn't necessarily knock him out of the game, but maybe that injury kind of hampered his playing a little bit, and it really kept them from having a perfect season there. And lastly, the 1964 season as a whole, like I mentioned earlier, he was injured for pretty much the first half of it. While he was out, Navy went 1-3, and they finished the season 3-6-1. And Staubach pretty much battled injuries throughout the entire season. So 64 was kind of a bust year for him and really Navy in general there. So that was kind of some of the lower points of his career at Navy.
All right. Well, let's go a little bit outside the college game. Both these men graduated from their respective institutions. Tell me, Ben, briefly, tell me about Roger Staubach's career post-college.
He did graduate. He sure did. 1965. He graduated with an engineering degree, and he married his high school sweetheart. They met in fourth grade, and they dated all through high school. And so he marries her, and then he goes and begins his naval service. He spent 4 years in service, and that includes a 1-year tour in Vietnam as a supply officer. One thing that kind of speaks about his character is, he's a Heisman winning quarterback, and he could have easily requested an assignment in the United States, but he himself chose to volunteer 1 year of his life overseas in Vietnam. And so 1967 rolls around. He finishes his tour in Vietnam, and so he finishes out the rest of his career in the Navy in the United States. So 1969 rolls around, and he decides he's finished with the service, and he wants to go and play professional football. He entered the NFL as a 27-year-old rookie, kind of like a Chris Winkie. He was a rookie for the Dallas Cowboys, who had actually drafted him in the 10th round back in 1964. And you think, whoa, he was a Heisman winning quarterback. Why did he go all the way in the 10th round? Well, a lot of teams knew that he had at least a 4-year commitment to Navy, to the armed services. So a lot of teams skipped on him because they didn't want to deal with, having to wait so long, blah, 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 whatever. So he lasted all the way to the 10th round. Dallas picks him up. He spends a couple of years backing up Craig Morton, I believe. He would kind of come in briefly and kind of do either mop-up duty or this and that. But it wasn't until 1971 that he became the starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And this kind of shows that he, how he really reached his full potential once he was, no offense to Navy, but once he was on a team that had some really great offensive weapons. Some of the players he had to work with was Lance Allworth, Mike Ditka, Walt Garrison, who's a really underrated running back, and Bob Hayes. He went on to lead the Cowboys to 10 consecutive wins, including a 24-3 Super Bowl victory over Miami. And Staubach would be named the Super Bowl MVP of that game. We're going to flash forward a little bit because I don't have time to talk about his whole career. 1977, he leads Dallas to another Super Bowl victory, this time over the Broncos. And his final season would come in 1979. And even in 1979, he was still playing at a very high level. He had career highs in completions with 267. He had a career high in passing yards with 3,586 and a career high in touchdowns with 27. And in 1978, he was named the NFL Man of the Year. He retired from the NFL after only 11 seasons. And he said the reason that he did this was to protect his long-term health. He said that during those 11 seasons, really you think probably more like 9, that he actually was the starter, he had at least 20 concussions while playing in the NFL. And it was documented that there was one year that he had already had a couple of concussions, and the doctor said, you're probably good now, but if you have another one this season, it could probably have lifelong effects on you. And so I think stuff like that was kind of on his mind. And he's more of a family guy, so he was kind of looking down the road instead of looking at the present. One example of this is whenever he did win the Super Bowl MVP back in '71, he was gifted a Dodge Charger for being named Super Bowl MVP. And what he does is he takes that Dodge Charger and trades it in for a station wagon. He says, I've got 5 kids. He did. He said, I've got 5 kids. I've got no use for this, so I'm going to trade it in for something that I can get some use out of. So
Wow.
Staubach finished his NFL career with 22,700 passing yards, 153 passing touchdowns, 2,264 rushing yards, and another 21 rushing touchdowns. At the time of his retirement, he boasted an 83.4 passer rating, which was the highest passer rating percentage of all time at that point. He was a 2-time Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP, 6-time Pro Bowler, 4-time passer rater leader. He's a member of the 70s All-Decade team and the NFL 100th All-Century team. He's in the Cowboys Ring of Honor and a member of the NFL Hall of Fame. And when he retired from the NFL, he still had pretty good health. He said even though like he could only lift his left shoulder just a little bit, maybe like that, about halfway. But he still had pretty good health, and he was able to go on and enjoy a very successful life outside the NFL. He is a very successful businessman, most notably with the Staubach Realty Estate. So pretty much in all phases of life, he's been able to enjoy a whole lot of success.
Right. I assume you're going to talk to me about a certain game at Mile High against the Steelers for Mr. Tebow and your post-college career analysis of Tim Tebow.
We'll get there. When Tebow graduated Florida, enters himself into the NFL draft, he found himself in a lot of the same situations he found early in high school, where his athleticism could not be denied, but is he really a quarterback? And that was a pretty highly debated topic going in between the end of his senior year and the NFL draft for a few months there. And you had two sides of the argument. On one side, you had Super Bowl winning Hall of Fame coach John Gruden, who thought that Tebow could revolutionize the game and called him, and I quote, the strongest human being that's ever played the position. He can throw well enough at any level. You had another Super Bowl winning Hall of Fame head coach, Tony Dungy, who said that he would draft Tim Tebow with a top 10 pick over any quarterback in that year's draft. That's one side of the argument. Two Super Bowl winning Hall of Fame quarterbacks. On the other side of the argument, you've got people like Mel Kiper, who have made a living on being wrong more than they're right, who said that he didn't think Tim Tebow had the intangibles to be an NFL quarterback. Said he didn't think he could do it, said he might be worth a pick in the third round based on his athletic ability and maybe using him in different areas all over the field, probably more likely a tight end or a slot receiver position. Well, another Super Bowl winning Hall of Fame quarterback, not coach, but quarterback, who was a GM, and a quarterback with a head coach that had a rookie head coach, John Elway and Josh Daniels decided that, we'll trade up into the first round. So Tebow ends up getting drafted in the first round to the Denver Broncos. His first year, he played the last 3 games because of injury. Didn't look bad, didn't look overly exceptional, but didn't look bad. He won one of those games, but really he came more to life in his second year in the NFL. In 2011, the Broncos started 1-4. So they made the decision to name Tim Tebow the starter. He became a starter, and in that back half of the year, he threw for 1,800 yards. He threw 12 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions. He ran for 660 yards and 6 touchdowns. And the Broncos came back and won the AFC West that year, meaning they get to the playoffs. And not only that, they won their division, so they get to host a playoff game. Well, in come the big bad Pittsburgh Steelers to Mile High Stadium. So Steelers come to Mile High for the wild card round. That game, Tebow did okay. He threw for 316 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, ran for 50 yards and a touchdown, and had a pretty big play in overtime that went a pretty good distance. And lo and behold, the Broncos won 29-23 in overtime, knocking off the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was the Broncos' first playoff win since 2005. And as a matter of fact, since 2005, there have only been 2 quarterbacks to win playoff games for the Broncos. One of those, Tim Tebow, the jersey I'm wearing. One of those, Peyton Manning, the jersey you are wearing, in the twilight of his career. Another important note, Tony Dungy said he would draft Tebow over any other quarterback in that draft. Tony Dungy is a very smart man because Tim Tebow is the only quarterback in that draft class that included Sam Bradford, that included Colt McCoy. He's the only one that won, including Jimmy Clausen. He's the only one that won a playoff game in his career. But that offseason afterwards, Peyton Manning was basically kicked out of Indianapolis. And John Elway thought he'd bring him into Elway thought he'd bring him in. You'd rather have Peyton Manning than second, third year Tim Tebow. That makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. You want to win now. So they trade Tebow to the Jets, where nothing good has ever happened since Joe Namath in Super Bowl III. So that experiment didn't go well, and then he got kind of tossed around. He signed for the Patriots for a little bit, didn't actually make the team. Signed for the Eagles a little bit, didn't actually make the team. So then he transitioned to broadcasting. Signed with ESPN, still works for ESPN some. Mainly doing SEC Network's version of College Game Day, a lot of college analysis. But then in 2016, Tebow announced he wanted to try his hand at baseball. He hadn't played baseball really since his junior year of high school back in 2005. So the odds of him being on a professional level were a little sketch. A lot of people didn't think it would happen. Granted, he was a good baseball player in high school. He was all-state his junior year. The Angels had told him if he played his senior year, they were going to draft him at some point. So he was a baseball prospect, but then obviously football happened. But he announced in August of 2016 he was going to have an open tryout and invited all Major League Baseball teams to come watch. Before the tryout even happened, he was offered a contract by two separate independent minor league teams and a team in Venezuela who saw an opportunity there. But of course, he has this tryout. After this tryout, Tim Tebow is a man after my own heart. He signs with the New York Mets to a minor league deal. His very first home run as a professional in the instructional league, his very first at bat was a home run because he's a winner, and that's what he does. That story is still being told. It's a story in progress. I mean, in 2016, he was a 28-year-old rookie, basically. Odds aren't in his favor, but, it's a story still being told. He was on the Mets spring training team this year. He homered in spring training this year. And honestly, he's in a position when COVID is over and fans are back in the stands, and if the Mets start to Mets in September, if they're out of a race in the next year or two and attendance is down and they need to boost sales, it's very plausible that at some point in the next few years, Tebow will get a major league call-up. Will he go on to be an all-star in the major leagues one day? Probably not. But a September call-up in the next couple years is a very possible thing. And as a matter of fact, next year, the World Baseball Classic hopefully will still go on as planned, and Tim Tebow is playing in the World Baseball Classic for the Philippines because that's where he was born. They asked him to play, and he was very happy to oblige them. So we will get to see him play with the best baseball players in the world when the World Baseball Classic rolls around next year. So that story is still being told.
Are you one of these people that honestly believes that Tim Tebow would have been a good NFL quarterback if he was in a better situation, not New York, but somewhere else? Do you honestly believe that he could have been a good NFL quarterback if he was in a better situation?
He had a winning record. He won a playoff game. Why wouldn't he be? He was never given an opportunity past that. Why wouldn't he be? There's nothing that shows me he can't. There is more evidence to show he would have been than evidence to show he wouldn't have. He was in a bad situation where his name garnered so much attention, teams didn't want to deal with it. I'm not trying to be political at all, but the best comparison I can make right now, look at Colin Kaepernick. Don't look at anything political about it. Colin Kaepernick, while not as good as he thinks he is by any stretch of the imagination, could have easily been a backup quarterback in the last 4 or 5 years for a team. But a team's not going to bring him in because of the attention he's going to bring in that could be a distraction. Tebow, not through negative attention, but just positive attention. Tim Tebow for a while was in that category of a LeBron James where if he farted, ESPN was right there to tell you what he had for lunch and what the decibel level of the fart was. He brought a lot of attention with him, and teams didn't want to deal with that, and because of that, he didn't get a fair shake. But there's more evidence to show he would have been a good quarterback than a bad one.
I just asked the questions, so don't shoot the messenger. I'm just to ask her questions on this humble show.
I just answered your question.
There we go. Well, bring it home. Tell us, Rod, what is the legacy, at least the college sense? What is the legacy of Tim Tebow?
I think when you think Tim Tebow, especially at the collegiate level, but even into today, it's two things that aren't connected, but with him they are connected. Um, well, there's a couple combinations, and the first one is his faith and his influence, and those are connected. Tim Tebow, very, very, very Christian man. He's never been ashamed of that. He's displayed that pretty much anytime he's been in the public eye. Uh, was known for having Bible studies and prayers with his teammates at Florida. Some of them probably should have paid a little better attention during those times when history looks back at it. But he he was involved in that. But when I say that his faith and his influence are connected, national championship game against Oklahoma, Tim Tebow used to wear eye black under his eyes, and he would write messages on those on the eye black, and it was usually scripture. In that game on national television, it's a national championship game, he had John 3:16 on his eye black, which I don't necessarily know the popularity of different Bible verses as far as the world goes, but I would guess it's probably the most well-known Bible verse that there is out there. It's John 3:16, but despite that fact, when he wore that on his eye black in the national championship that game, within the next 24 hours, John 3:16 was Googled 94 million times after that game because there was an influence there connected with his faith. Another thing, a few years ago, there were two things that were kind of back to back that became fads. One was planking. People went to plank wherever they could. And the next thing was Tebowing, which was basically mimicking him where he dropped to a knee and said a prayer before every game. Him doing that sparked people Tebowing, where they would be taking a knee wherever they were. But his faith and his influence over people is one thing I think is his legacy. Another thing, when we're talking more of him as an athlete, him as a competitor, two things that go hand in hand, another combo, is his toughness and his competitiveness. Overcoming the odds is something he's always done. He was not supposed to be born, but he was. He's dyslexic, but he still went on to be an academic All-American. He broke his leg in high school, we talked about earlier, and finished the game, including a long touchdown run. His sophomore year of college against FSU, he fractured his right hand in that game. Didn't come out of the game because it wasn't his throwing hand. Wore a cast for 3 weeks after that and then started the bowl game. Never missed a game. Right after that national championship game against Oklahoma, he announces he's coming. A week later, he announced in the swamp, I'm coming back next year. I'm not going pro. The next day after he announced that, he had surgery on his right shoulder to remove a bone spur that had been causing him problems all year, his junior year, the year that was probably the best of his career. His senior year, Kentucky game, he was sick as a dog all day going into that game. He had to have IV fluids, 2 bags worth, pumped into him before the Kentucky game. Went out there in the third quarter of that game, when he's already sick as a dog, he takes a sack and on the way down hits his head against Marcus Gilbert, his tackle's knee brace, one of those hard knee braces. Takes a sack, hits his head on a knee brace on the way down, shows immediate signs of a concussion. Eyes are glazed over, gets to the sidelines and throws up. And they had an off week the next week. Tebow never missed a game for that. So his whole life, his toughness, his competitiveness, his leadership, the promise, I promise you, no one will play as hard as I do the rest of this season. Nobody will push his team to play as hard as we will play the rest of this season. And they did. They went on to win a national championship. So I think his legacy is his faith and influence, his toughness and his competitiveness, and his leadership. And he's a winner. Always has been, on and off the field. And there's been nothing to show otherwise.
Bennett, haven't heard from you in a while.
I'm still here.
Sorry.
Tell me about the college legacy of Mr. Staubach.
Yeah, real quick here. When I think of some of the words that would best describe Roger Staubach's collegiate career, there were a few that came to mind, such as resilience, leadership, toughness, fortitude, a man of faith like Mr. Tim Tebow, man of honor, a dual threat quarterback, the ultimate teammate, Heisman winner, and Hall of Famer. But there's a couple that stuck out to me more than the rest that I thought were worth mentioning. First is his leadership during his time at Naval Academy. Before I talk about that, let's go back a little bit to his high school days. His coaches said that Mr. Staubach had always possessed an ability to grab people's attention, and something that the coaches noticed that his teammates, whether they were older than him or same age or younger, they always seemed to listen to him. And that's something that you can't really teach. That's just something that you're born with. He went from being a freshman wide receiver to quarterback to lead his team to a 9-1 mark, like I said, which was 9th in the state. And then he goes to college and goes from being fourth string Loman on the totem pole his sophomore year to all the way up to starting midway through the season, and would go on to lead them to a 9-1 mark and an appearance in the NCAA championship game. Another thing about Mr. Staubach at Navy was he was a really good. He was a great teammate, and he wasn't selfish. He showed a lot of selflessness. Roger himself once said that you have to give a darn about something else besides yourself. His exact words. When he was awarded the Heisman Trophy, and this is a guy we're talking about that's, in his very early 20s, he was quick to point out that this wasn't a he award. This was a team award. And that he joked that one day he was going to cut the trophy up into a bunch of small pieces and hand them out to all his teammates. And who knows, maybe one day he may very well end up doing just that. Who knows? I'm talking about being a good teammate. He went to war with his teammates quite literally. The men that he played with, they went to war on the gridiron, and they went to war overseas. And to this very day, he shares a great camaraderie with his teammates. They still get together a lot. They still speak a lot. He put his NFL career on hold to serve his country, and he and his teammates also helped to heal the nation during John F. Kennedy's tragic assassination. So, yeah, like real quick, I'd say that his legacy would be his ability to be a great leader on and off the field, and his ability to be a great teammate. You could also say both on and off the field as well.
All right. I don't have any follow-up questions for either of you tonight. So let's just go straight into closing arguments. Right? Convince me that Tim Tebow is not as good as Peyton Manning.
Can't do it. Can't do it.
Why not? No me.
You know what I meant.
Here's the thing. If we're looking at who had the better career overall, especially if we factor in a professional level, this is obviously a Roger Staubach answer. He's an NFL Hall of Famer, won a couple Super Bowl rings, was part of some historic teams there in Dallas. But we're talking strictly college here. And when we talk strictly college, I'm going to keep this short as opposed to my other answers. Bleacher Report, Sports Nation, 24/7 Sports, Fan Buzz, and an ESPN coaches poll they did of active college coaches a couple years ago. All those things have in common, they named Tim Tebow as the greatest college quarterback of all time. And that was pretty common anywhere you look. I've said numerous times on the show, I like to Google other lists. Interesting note, on the ranker poll where the fans vote on who's the greatest of all time, Tebow is number 2. Number 1 was Joe Burrow. I think there was some recency bias there by quite a bit. But all these other ones, they say Tim Tebow. But probably my strongest source, a father of a good friend of this show. Won't name any names, but he's the only guest we've ever had on this show up to this point. His father is an Ole Miss graduate who has been going to games in Oxford since Joe Namath was at Alabama. A while. And he's one of my favorite human beings on the face of the earth. And me and him had a chat a couple years ago now. And somehow the topic of Tim Tebow came up. And he told me, and he was being serious. There are times he's not always so serious, but he was being serious in this conversation. He looked at me and said, I've watched Joe Namath and every other player that's ever come through Oxford and play here play. And Tim Tebow is the greatest college football player I've ever seen in person in my life. And coming from him, that meant a lot. And I trust him over these other places like Bleacher Report, Sports Nation, ESPN. I would trust him over them, but they all agree. Tim Tebow is the greatest college quarterback of all time. There's an argument to be made he's the best college player of all time. But he's the best college quarterback of all time. No disrespect, Roger Staubach, who is a legend, not only for the Naval Academy, but for this country. My brother's a Cowboys fan. He's a big Staubach fan. But on the collegiate level, Staubach was not at the level of Tim Tebow because nobody has ever been at the level of Tim Tebow.
All right. But after listening to all that gibberish that just came out of Rhett's mouth, convince me that you should win tonight and that Roger Staubach is the better college quarterback than Tim Tebow.
Yeah, I also got on the Googles here and was looking at some of these polls that were published by various so-called experts, if you will. Interestingly enough, in January of this year, 2020, ESPN put out their list of the top 150 college football players of all time, and they ranked Roger Staubach number 11, and they had no quarterback ranked ahead of him. In fact, they had the next highest ranked quarterback at 21. You know who that was? The man of the jersey you're wearing, Peyton Manning.
Ooh, I like this poll. I like this poll.
I found also a poll that was put out by Bleacher Report here fairly recently, not this year, but 2 or 3 years old, and they had a very similar list: top 100, top 150 college athletes of all time, and they ranked Roger Staubach as the 9th greatest college football player of all time. He was the 2nd highest ranked quarterback. You know who was ranked ahead of him? Sammy Ball, 1 spot ahead of him at number 8. Likewise, NBC Sports ranked Staubach number 11 in their list of the greatest college players of all time. And there was no quarterbacks ranked higher than Staubach. And all these polls are compiled by a panel of judges that know a thing or two about football. It's not Ranker. It's not, these kids go in here and say, "Yo, yeah, Joe Burrow, he's the man." These are the same people that voted Johnny Manziel as the greatest ever. And you don't hear nothing about Johnny Manziel anymore. Exactly.
Johnny Football.
Money phone. For his college career, he finished with 3,799 passing yards, 635 rushing yards, and 36 touchdowns. I talked about him being a kind of a pioneer of that dual threat quarterback, and I think this stat really shows that he had 18 passing touchdowns and 18 rushing touchdowns. You can't get too much more even than that. As a junior, he won the Maxwell Award, the Heisman Award, was a consensus All-American with Forrest Gump there. And he was just the 4th person ever in history to win a Heisman and be named a Super Bowl MVP. He's a college and NFL Hall of Famer. His number 12 jersey has been retired by Navy, like I talked about before. And like him or not, I know everybody has their own opinions about this man, but Lee Corso went on television and said that Roger Staubach was the greatest football player ever. That's what Lee Corso said. And he's seen quite a few players.
Yes.
Most recently, Mr. Staubach was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom a couple of years ago in 2018. Now, I know that when you look at his stats, like I talked about, they don't jump off the page like some of these guys do today. But we can't really compare Staubach's stats from the 60s with those of your guys from the 2000s, even the 2010, 2020s. They're completely different eras. Mm-hmm. And these two men's careers were over 40 years apart. The game was vastly, vastly different in Staubach's time. We weren't around to see Staubach's heroics on the football field every Saturday. You know, we have the stats, but we don't see like that one play that he made that kept the drive going, or that one little thing that he did, or maybe an audible that he called at the line. We don't see that like we did see with Tebow. We lived through the Tebow era, so we know all about what Tebow did on the field. But what we do know is that during his time, Staubach was unquestionably the greatest player in the NCAA at his time. He greatly exceeded those of those peers. He greatly exceeded his peers when he was given the opportunity and whenever he stayed healthy. He didn't have like a team full of NFL player caliber talent. The only player from any of those teams that he played on to go on to play professionally was him. It was just Staubach. He is, without a shadow of a doubt, the greatest player to ever come out of Naval Academy. And I would venture to say he's probably the greatest player to ever come out of any of the service branches. It's hard to do to make that statement that you are the bona fide greatest player to ever come from your school. You look at Tim Tebow, and he's certainly up there as the greatest Florida Gator of all time. I totally agree. He's one of the greats, but it could be a matter of opinion. Somebody could also say that maybe Emmett is the greatest Florida Gator of all time. Maybe they say Steve Spurrier, Danny Warfel, Chris Leak, Fred Taylor. If somebody thinks that Fred Taylor was great. Javon Curse, if you're a defensive guy. Now, we've poked fun at this a lot tonight, but Elrod, this is your chance to finally give Tebow that loss. Now, in all seriousness, no, Roger Staubach wasn't just a great quarterback. He was also a great American hero. So when you make your decision tonight, I hope that you vote for America. I love this. As in Captain America. So you should vote for Roger the Dodger Staubach.
How many episodes? How many episodes will this make us since we've been doing this?
This is our 23rd.
Bennett's closing argument is the greatest closing argument we've had in 23 episodes by anybody.
Vote for America?
Vote for America.
Okay, football rules.
No, he brought it. He brought it in that closing argument with a lot of good stats. A lot of stuff I was going to cover in my analysis, but let's get right to it. I'm kind of curious to see how Staubach's stats would have been if we brought him to the modern age and put him under center for those 4 years in Gainesville. Would he have won a national championship with that talent? Probably. Do y'all agree with that? At least one.
It's hard to say, you know.
Likewise, if you put Tim Tebow on those Navy teams back in the 60s, does he have the same success as Staubach had? We really don't know. Don't know.
He'd be way bigger than anybody on the Navy.
He'd be bigger than his linemen. It'd be some Jared Lorenzen stuff going on.
All right. So it's no secret that I've wanted to go out of my way to screw Tim Tebow tonight in terms of giving him the loss. So I went back in time and looked. I was convinced that Navy did not have a lot of success. I knew they had in the early 20th century with them in Army. I knew they had a bunch of success. I went back and looked at the stats in terms of their performance in the late 50s. Navy was good before Staubach got there in the late 50s. In 59, they finished 13th. They had a fifth. The year before that, they finished 5th in the AP poll. Before that, 16th. So it wasn't like that Navy was chopped liver during that time. I thought that Staubach came along and resurrected them and brought them back. I mean, they didn't go to the national championship in those seasons, but they were not bottom feeders like they were in the later 20th century or a decade before that. They were a perennial top 25 team. Staubach put them over the top and brought them to that elite level. But I have to look at the stats. I have to look at the fact that Tim Tebow is responsible for a national championship as a starting quarterback. If you don't have him in 2006, I don't think Florida wins that national championship. I think they lose 2 or 3 games. They lose the Tennessee game for sure. They might have lost a couple more. You got to look at – I can't hold the talent against Tebow against him. I mean, that's just the circumstances he was in.
He played a lot of good talent against a lot of good talent too.
He did. He also played in the SEC in that era. As much as I want to give this victory to Bennett, and as much as I want to give him his first loss against the Men in Orange, you know what? Screw it. I am the mediator tonight. In the words of Lee Corso, not so fast, my friend. Roger Staubach is the victor tonight, and Bennett wins the show tonight. Tim Tebow gets his first loss against the Men in Orange, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it was.
Well, you called it, right?
Now to you, the listener. Call me Nostradamus. Call me Nostratus, as I think Bennett referred to me as the other day for a completely separate topic. But I told you what was going to happen, and it did. I knew I wasn't going to convince this idiot.
Yeah.
I knew I wouldn't, and it's fine.
No.
You all heard the arguments. You all make your own decisions. So, Bennett, victory
I'll be
speech?
curious to see what the I'm going to take this time to show off this little gem. People, this will be a YouTube exclusive. This, my friends, was my lucky charm tonight.
Nice.
No, I mean, it's something like this is really hard to pit two guys that are from completely different eras up to it. I think both of these men are excellent quarterbacks at the college level and even in the pro level. It was a fun show for sure. I got my Forrest Gump reference in.
Is this one of your favorite episodes?
It's one of my favorite. I'm gonna have to go back and watch film and see if it's gonna be the favorite.
That's your lowest praise for an episode thus far. I'm shocked that we went this far into the show. I'm disappointed in both of you. There was a great song a few years ago by a gentleman named Mark Wills called 19 something, and he talks
Roger
about
Staubach in my backyard.
Exactly. Nobody mentioned it.
I thought about it a few times, but it's like,
It's a great song. I mean, it's the only thing he ever did. I mean,
you know, that song is the most played song of the 90s in country music. Do you know that? 99? I think it came out in
I
99.
didn't know it, but I don't doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it talks about Roger Staubach, talks about
Space Shuttle.
Stretch Armstrong, and it talks about Daisy Duke.
Space Shuttle.
America.
Well, that's just sad, but it does talk about it. Talks about Elvis, too. But anyway, all right, guys. Well, another one in the books.
How does it feel to take that big L for your boy, Tim Tebow? How does it feel, right? How does it feel? Does it feel like it felt for me for 4 years when he was ruining my birthdays every year?
Feels about 25% as bad because it's only happened once. But guys and gals, thanks for voting. Thanks for checking the show out. Be sure you check out next week because next week's show, we've got a guest coming in. It's a little off format, but it's going to be fun. And if it's fun enough, we may do it again sometime. Be sure to keep posted to the socials to see the previews for that. Join us right back here next week. For Mr. Casey Elrod, Mr. Brian Bennett. Gentlemen, any parting words?
See you
Go Vols.
Go Noles.
All right. See you guys later. Peace. Go
Peace.
get that.